Australia, the late 80s. It wasn't just a continent, it was a cultural ecosystem. And on its racetracks, and in the hearts of millions, one timeless rivalry pulsed: Ford versus Holden. These two automotive dynasties were more than just brands. They were banners, symbols of national identity, the fuel for endless arguments at barbecues and in pubs. Every weekend, when the V8 Supercars, then known as the ATCC, lined up on the starting grid, the air vibrated with anticipation, and the crowds roared, ready for the next chapter in this epic battle. This was an era of raw power, thunderous engines, rear-wheel drive, and uncompromising pure Australian motorsport, where the heroes were as large and charismatic as their cars. No one could have imagined that this heavily guarded kingdom of brute force and national tradition was about to be invaded. An invasion that would come from the East, from a world where technology, not just engine size, dictated the rules. Thousands of kilometers from the sun-drenched tracks of Australia, in the rapidly advancing nation of Japan, a revolution was brewing. In August of 1989, Nissan unveiled its new model, the Skyline GT-R R32. This wasn't just another car in the lineup. This was a meticulously engineered war machine, built with a single, almost arrogant purpose: to crush the global standards of Group A racing. Nissan's engineers weren't just building a sports car, they were crafting an engineering manifesto. Their goal was so ambitious, it demanded entirely new approaches to design and dynamics. Under the hood of this steel samurai beat a heart that would soon become a legend: the 2.6-liter, twin-turbo RB26 DET engine. An inline-six, engineered with a phenomenal margin of safety, capable of withstanding colossal stress and generating power far beyond its officially stated 280 horsepower, the so-called gentleman's agreement of the Japanese auto industry. But the real revolution was hidden underneath. It was the ATCC ETS all-wheel drive system, a cutting-edge, intelligent transmission that could instantly and seamlessly redistribute torque between the axles, sending up to 50% to the front wheels. Unlike traditional, dumb AWD systems, the ATCC ETS was like a living organism, adapting to road conditions in a heartbeat, providing phenomenal grip and unprecedented control. Add to that the high-CAS four-wheel steering system, and you had a car that was literally glued to the tarmac, refusing to obey the laws of physics familiar to the old schools of racing thought. The R32 was a monster born in the digital age, while its potential rivals were still living in an analog world. Meanwhile, Australia carried on as usual. The racing world was preparing for another season, another no-holds-barred clash between the Commodore and the Falcon, another chapter in the endless saga of local heroes. But fate was already weaving its own unpredictable design. In 1990, this futuristic machine, this harbinger of a new era, set foot on Australian soil. The Nissan GT-R R32 debuted in the Australian Touring Car Championship, or ATCC. It didn't just debut, it arrived under the banner of Gibson Motorsport, a team known for its foresight and willingness to take risks. Behind the wheel of these unprecedented machines were two drivers destined to become legends: a young, daring, yet incredibly talented Mark Skaife, and the experienced, calculated, but no less swift Jim Richards. They were the messengers of a new age, unaware of the seismic shock they were about to deliver. In the paddocks, the atmosphere was one of self-assurance. Blueprints were laid out on tables, strategies honed over years were set in minds. But this confidence masked a dangerous blindness, an almost collective delusion. The race organizers, the promoters, the commentators, even the rivals, they were all prisoners of their own history, shackled by tradition. They saw the ATCC as an arena for a V8 battle, for the great showdown between Ford and Holden. Tradition, raw power, the piercing roar of engines. That's what defined their world. Foreign cars, when they did appear, were usually cast as exotic extras, incapable of mounting a true challenge. No one believed this Japanese toy, this turbocharged Skyline, could stand up to the local titans, the symbols of brutal strength. They focused on their familiar rivalry, failing to see the technological revolution already poised to strike. They weren't ready for this leap forward, for intelligent all-wheel drive, for the surgical precision of a turbo engine, for the cold-blooded Japanese engineering hidden behind a modest emblem. They underestimated its potential, its power to change the game. And this underestimation, this blind faith in their own paradigm, would prove to be not just a mistake, but a fatal miscalculation that would shake Australian motorsport to its very foundations. The battlefield was set. Against age-old traditions, against the brute force of mighty V8s, against the entrenched ideas of what a true race car should be, stood a stranger from the future. Quiet, but deadly, ready to crush everything in its path. It didn't come just to compete, it came to conquer. And the world of Australian motorsport, as they knew it, would never be the same. In 1990, this harbinger of a new era didn't just show up, it began rewriting the rules. From the very first races of the ATCC, it became brutally clear to the local titans, accustomed to the roar of V8s, that their world was being turned upside down. The intelligent all-wheel drive system, that invisible helper, pinned the car to the tarmac where its rear-wheel drive rivals fought desperately for every inch of grip. In corners where the powerful but heavy V8 slid clumsily, this engineering marvel clung to the racing line with surgical precision as if it were glued down. And on the straights, the turbo engine, its true potential hidden by the gentleman's agreement, unleashed its real devastating power, leaving nothing but confusion and dust in its wake. The victories began to pour in. In its very first season, the GT-R R32 started to methodically dismantle the local automotive icons. Every race became a demonstration of technological superiority, every finish line another nail in the coffin of the old era. The gap between the old world of raw power and the new world of intelligent technology wasn't just big, it was catastrophic. It was then, as the Japanese car began to dominate with such brazen impunity, that the Australian press, always fond of a vivid nickname, found the perfect one. What do you call this foreign, invincible monster that came from the East and systematically destroyed everything sacred to Australian racing? Where else could such a destroyer have come from? The answer came from the cinema. It became Godzilla, the Japanese colossus that rose from the other side of the world to shatter the established order, leaving scorched earth in its wake, and writing its name in history with the terrifying scream of its turbos instead of the thunderous roar of a V8. The nickname stuck instantly. It was ominous, accurate, and, as it turned out, prophetic. 1991 was to be the peak of this invasion. There was no room left for underestimation or naivety. Everyone knew what this metal monster was capable of. Mark Skaife, behind the wheel of this phenomenal machine, didn't just compete, he dominated. His performance in the ATCC championship was not just strong, it was almost arrogant in its superiority. He clinched the championship title, showcasing not only his outstanding talent, but the absolute supremacy of Godzilla over everyone else. But the true coronation awaited at the very heart of Australian racing. The Bathurst 1000. This isn't just a race, it's hallowed ground, a mecca where every corner is steeped in the history of Ford versus Holden battles. Here, on the mystical Mount Panorama, where speeds are insane and the track forgives only perfection, The duo of Jim Richards and Mark Skaife would face their final, most ferocious resistance. The local teams threw everything they had into the fight, trying to stop the Japanese monster on their home turf. But even the legendary Mount Panorama was powerless against this giant. The intelligent ATCC ETS all-wheel drive system, the turbocharged engine delivering monstrous power, and the flawless handling that allowed it to carve through corners at incredible speeds, it all came together to create an unstoppable force. Richards and Skaife, working as one with the machine, drove a perfect race. When the checkered flag marked their triumph at the Bathurst 1000, the air hung not just with the cheers of victory, but with a bitter realization for the entire Australian racing elite. Godzilla hadn't just arrived, it had conquered. It hadn't just participated, it had completely redrawn the map of dominance. The Nissan GT-R R32 had become an unbeatable monster, its name spoken with a mix of respect and fear. The era of Ford and Holden's dominance seemed to be over. But this stunning triumph didn't bring peace. On the contrary, it only fanned the flames of resentment, which would soon erupt with unprecedented force, threatening to consume not only Godzilla, but the very spirit of Australian motorsport. The triumph at Bathurst in 1991, that deafening victory cry, brought no peace. It shattered the veil of illusion, exposing a brutal truth. The established world order had collapsed. The Nissan GT-R R32, nicknamed Godzilla, wasn't just another rival. It was a destroyer, an alien playing by its own, incomprehensible rules. And now, as the dust from its victories settled, a different noise began to emerge from behind the scenes, a whisper of discontent that grew into a rumble, and then into open anger. Australian motorsport was suffocating. The Ford and Holden teams, who had dominated the tracks in the hearts of fans for decades, were suddenly sidelined. Their mighty, roaring V8s, considered unbeatable just yesterday, now looked archaic next to the technological marvel from Japan. Every lap, Godzilla, completed seconds faster than their best cars, was a blow to their pride, to the national spirit. This was more than just losing a race. It was a defeat of ideology, of the very idea of what a true race car should be. And so, faced with this unprecedented domination, the central governing body, CAMS, the Confederation of Australian Motorsport, found itself trapped. They couldn't just sit back and watch. The spectacle of one car systematically annihilating the entire competition was bad for the sport and its commercial appeal. Fans, accustomed to the fierce battles between Ford and Holden, were losing interest. But how do you rein in a monster built by a completely different set of laws? How do you level the playing field when one player has what seems like an unfair advantage? The first attempts to tame the Japanese beast were timid but telling. CAMS began to methodically, step by step, strip the GT-R of its power. First came the minimum weight. The Nissan's weight was artificially increased to slow it down, to give the V8s a fighting chance. Imagine that, the champion forced to carry extra baggage just to make the race more interesting for those who couldn't beat it fair and square. It was humiliating. But even with the extra kilos, Godzilla continued to dictate the terms. Its intelligent all-wheel drive and phenomenal turbo torque easily compensated for the handicap. So CAMS went further. They imposed a limit on the turbo boost pressure. This was a direct shot at the heart of the machine, at its ferocious, hidden power. The goal was clear: to reduce the crushing force that left rivals in the dust on the straights. But in this battle of wits against pure engineering genius, the Australian regulators were repeatedly outplayed. Every new restriction, every handicap, only spurred the engineers at Nissan and Gibson Motorsport to find new solutions. They adapted, retuned, and squeezed every last drop of performance from the car within the new rules. Godzilla kept winning, perhaps by smaller margins, but just as relentlessly. It was during this period that the real drama unfolded behind the scenes. Under the guise of sporting balance, a firestorm was brewing. Persistent rumors claimed that lobbying from the Australian teams, primarily Ford and Holden, of course, had reached unprecedented levels. These automotive giants, accustomed to their privileged position, couldn't accept foreign domination. Their executives, their PR departments, their engineers, they all united to put pressure on CAMs. Their argument was simple and clear. Our V8s simply can't compete with this car. It's too advanced, too technological. It's not a fair fight. It was a cry of desperation, mixed with pure, unadulterated envy. They weren't asking for their own cars to be improved. They were demanding that Godzilla be crippled, cut down, defanged. The atmosphere in the paddocks became so thick you could cut it with a knife. The sporting rivalry, once confined to fierce battles on the track, had now spilled over into a political struggle, threatening to tear the entire Australian motorsport community apart. This was not just a conflict between cars, it was a clash of cultures, of technologies, and of ideas about what the true spirit of racing really was. Australia was trying to tame the Japanese beast, not realizing that it couldn't simply be tied down or domesticated. It had to be either accepted or destroyed, and while CAMS wasted its energy on futile attempts at balancing, a far more radical and final plan was being born behind closed doors. A plan that would solve the Godzilla problem once and for all. If 1991 was the year of the invasion, 1992 became the year of total domination. Time moved on, but Australian motorsport continued to suffocate in the shadow of the Japanese titan. This engineering masterpiece, despite all attempts to muzzle it, artificially increased weight, slashed turbo boost, remained unbeatable. Every new handicap only highlighted its unyielding will to win, its adaptability forged in the crucible of fierce competition. Mark Skaife, at the helm of Godzilla, wasn't just driving. He was carving a path into history, effortlessly claiming his second consecutive ATCC championship title. This wasn't a competition. It was a demonstration of absolute superiority that provoked not just envy anymore, but deep, undisguised resentment. Skaife and his Nissan were a living rebuke to the entire Australian racing industry, which had rested on its V8 laurels for decades. And then came Bathurst, the legendary mountain where every corner, every inch of tarmac is soaked in history and blood. It was here, on Mount Panorama, that fates were decided, heroes were born, and legends died. This wasn't just a race, it was an annual ritual, the very heartbeat of Australian motorsport. And Godzilla had already desecrated this temple once. But on that day, October 4th, 1992, nature itself decided to add to the drama. The heavens opened up, turning the track into a slippery, treacherous labyrinth. The rain wasn't just a backdrop, it became another competitor, ruthless and unpredictable. Dozens of cars skidded, lost grip, and slammed into barriers, turning the race into a chaotic spectacle of survival. It was in these apocalyptic conditions that the mastery of Jim Richards and Mark Skaife, behind the wheel of the Nissan GT-R R32, shone brightest. Their car didn't just drive in the rain, it seemed to glide, bypassing competitors who were battling the track more than each other. The ATCC ETS all-wheel drive system, so hated by the Australians for its unfair advantage, now became their only hope for survival in this watery hell. Its electronic brain instantly redistributed torque, clinging to the slightest hint of grip where the rear-wheel drive V8s had become uncontrollable boats. As the skeptics had predicted, chaos ensued. One crash followed another. The track became a battlefield, littered with the wreckage of shattered hopes. Eventually, the race had to be stopped early when the track became too dangerous. The red flags fell over Mount Panorama, sealing the fate of Nissan's second consecutive triumph. Jim Richards and Mark Skaife were once again the winners of the Bathurst 1000. But there was no celebration. Instead of applause, there was only a dull rumble that grew into a deafening chorus of boos. The Australian fans felt cheated. Their Fords and Holdens had been humiliated by the rain and technological superiority, and now this foreign car was celebrating, stealing their most sacred victory. It was a personal insult, a slap in the face to their motorsport pride. And at that moment, Jim Richards stepped onto the podium. A victory in a legendary race, but instead of joy, he was met with the anger and disappointment of the crowd. The booing was deafening, furious, unfair, and Richards, not one to hold back, didn't. He took the microphone, gave the crowd a hard stare, and uttered a phrase that echoes to this day, seared into the history of Australian motorsport like hot metal. "You're a pack of arseholes." Every word was a punch, thrown in the face of everything the Australians held dear. It wasn't just a response to the booing. It was a declaration of war, a final defiant challenge before the coming storm. With that exclamation, Richards not only cemented Godzilla's status as the ultimate villain, but, without knowing it, he also hastened its downfall. The hatred for the Japanese car had reached its peak, and against this backdrop of explosive emotion, in the corridors of power where plots had long been brewing, the plan to eliminate the Godzilla problem began to take final shape. The clock was ticking for the Japanese beast in Australian motorsport. The loud booing from the fans that pierced Bathurst and Richards' angry retort weren't just an emotional outburst. They were the catalyst, the final drop in a cup overflowing with hatred and helplessness. Godzilla's dominance had become more than just a sporting fact. It had become a national humiliation. And while passions flared in the stands, a conspiracy was already being woven in the high offices of CAMS, the Confederation of Australian Motorsport. Rumors that the Australian auto giants, Ford and Holden, were lobbying for changes with Triple. The force had been circling the paddocks like birds of prey. Their own V8s, symbols of national pride, were being defeated year after year by this outsider, whose technology seemed alien. The championship organizers, as it turned out, had catastrophically underestimated the true potential of the Japanese car back in the early 90s, when, designed specifically for Group A, it first hit Australian tracks. They were expecting the traditional Ford versus Holden rivalry. What they got was a technological revolution on wheels. All attempts to restrict it, adding weight, cutting turbo boost, only highlighted its untamable power. The monster just got angrier. And so, after that legendary, rain-soaked race at Mount Panorama, where the Japanese car once again claimed an undisputed victory, the moment of truth arrived. The backroom deals came to light. At the end of 1992, CAMS made an announcement that shook the world of Australian motorsport to its core. It was sharp, uncompromising, and left no room for interpretation. The International Group A regulations, under which the GT-R R32 had competed and triumphed, were being abolished. In their place came a new, purely domestic standard, V8 Supercars. This wasn't just an evolutionary step. It was a surgical operation, performed with one clear objective: The new rules were forged like shackles for the unwelcome champion. From now on, only rear-wheel drive sedans could compete, with one unshakable condition. Under their hoods had to beat an uncompromising 5-liter V8 engine. No complex all-wheel drive systems. No compact, yet devilishly efficient, twin-turbo 6-cylinders. Only the power and roar of 8 cylinders delivered to the rear wheels. In other words, it was a direct declaration of war on Godzilla. The Nissan GT-R R32, with its 2.6-liter twin-turbo RB26 DETT engine, and, most importantly, its innovative ATCC ETS all-wheel drive system, simply didn't fit into this new framework. It was everything the new rules were designed to eliminate. It was too technological, too fast, too foreign to the Australian spirit of racing. This was no coincidence, no simple effort to cut costs for teams or boost entertainment value. Although those arguments were undoubtedly part of the official press releases, the true motives were far more transparent. This was the deliberate murder of the Japanese monster, an act of banishment. The script was written to leave only 2 main characters on the track, the Holden Commodores and the Ford Falcons, to return the racing to their own national cars, and more importantly, to their own manufacturers. For Godzilla, this was a death sentence, too complex, too expensive, and too alien for the new era of Australian motorsport. It was pushed out, exiled, with no chance to adapt, no opportunity to compete. The era in which the Japanese titan reigned supreme on Australian tracks came to a dramatic but predictable end. The high-pitched scream of the RB26 was replaced by the deep, guttural roar of the V8s. The death of one legend gave birth to another, the V8 Supercars series. But for many fans, even those who hated Godzilla, it was clear. A tactical victory had been won, but at what cost? Australia got its races back, but lost one of the most exciting and controversial champions in its history. The races, without the monster, would never be the same. The mighty roar of the V8s replaced the piercing whistle of the turbos. The curtain fell, only to rise on an entirely new stage. The age of Godzilla was over, but its ghost lingered over the tracks. The adoption of the new V8 Supercars rules wasn't just a change in regulations, it was a statement. And the question whispered in the paddocks, debated at kitchen tables across Australia, wasn't why, but what was really behind this assassination. On the surface, the official reasons sounded logical. Group A, for all its technical sophistication, was becoming a bottomless pit of money. The variety of designs, demanding homologation rules, and complex international supply chains made racing astronomically expensive. For teams, especially smaller ones, staying competitive was becoming an impossible burden. The new unified V8 Supercars rules promised to cut costs, stabilize entry fees, and thus ensure a wider field of teams. It sounded convincing, a solid argument for the progress and sustainability of the sport. But there was another side to the coin, one far more emotional and deeply rooted in the Australian identity. The theory of fan fatigue from a foreign car. It wasn't just about losing. It was about a loss of identity, a feeling that their national sport had been taken over by an outsider. For years, Australians had idolized the battles between the Ford Falcon and the Holden Commodore. It was their rivalry, familiar and personal. The arrival of this engineering marvel from Japan, with its revolutionary all-wheel drive and twin-turbo engine, disrupted that sacred order. It was too perfect, too fast, too alien. When it won, it didn't inspire awe. It provoked a sense of injustice, even rejection. People didn't just want racing, they wanted their racing. Racing where their cars, their brands, their engineers fought on equal terms, It was here, in the dusty back rooms where the echo of engines gave way to the whisper of big money, that the real conspiracy was born, one far deeper than just a desire to save money or please the fans. The rumors were persistent. The introduction of the V8 Supercars rules wasn't a coincidence, but a deliberate, cold-blooded murder of Godzilla. It was a political decision, driven not only by sporting interests, but by economic and even nationalistic motives. Picture this: Australia's two largest car companies, Ford and Holden, their production lines, their dealership networks, their reputations on the line. Year after year, their flagship sedans, the symbols of their engineering prowess, were being defeated. It was a blow not just to their sporting prestige, but to their image, to their sales. And they weren't sitting idly by. The lobbying of CAMS, which had begun long before the climax of 1992, wasn't just a series of requests. It was powerful, multi-million-dollar pressure. They demanded their series back, their championship, where they could be the main heroes. And CAMS, many argue, found itself between a rock and a hard place. On one side, the need to adhere to international Group A standards. On the other, colossal pressure from the biggest players in the national market and disgruntled fans. The solution was radical. Scrap the international rules, create a purely Australian format. It wasn't a compromise, it was a complete reboot. And while the official reason was a desire for fair competition and cost reduction, the true goal, according to many, was simple: to exclude the GT-R, to clear the stage for the Ford and Holden duel, to recreate the golden era, but on new, carefully written terms. Godzilla was too dangerous, too powerful, too foreign for this new, meticulously constructed national mythology. The legacy of the Nissan GT-R R32 in Australia is more than just a string of victories and championship titles. It's a living reminder of how technology can clash with tradition, how a global challenge can provoke a nationalistic response. It's a story of how in motorsport, the stakes are often higher than just the finish line. They involve pride, economics, and a nation's very identity. In the end, Australian motorsport got the V8 Supercars, a series that became incredibly popular, truly the people's race, and deeply embedded in the country's culture. But at what price? Was it a necessary evolution, or the deliberate destruction of a worthy competitor? Was an outstanding machine excluded to preserve the Australian spirit of racing? These questions remain without a clear answer, and it is they that make the story of Godzilla in Australia so compelling and still the subject of fierce debate. Because even an exiled champion leaves its mark, and its shadow still serves as a reminder that behind the glory of victory often lie complex, sometimes cynical, backroom deals. The story of Godzilla in Australia is more than just a tale about a race car. It's a profound parable about the eternal conflict between progress and tradition, innovation and identity. It vividly showed how deeply national pride can be intertwined with what we consider ours, and how far we're willing to go to preserve that image, even if it means rejecting undeniable superiority. So, what was it? A necessary evolution for the sport, or a public act of banishment driven not by the spirit of competition, but by fear of an inevitable future? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and give us a like if this story made you think.